Hey everybody, and welcome back to my channel. This is part 2 of my Grungy Hearts ATC. If you missed the first part, I'm going to link it below. I have a little tutorial where I show you how I made these grungy little hearts out of a mixed media chipboard. And I'm on to part 2 now, which is making the cards, the artist trading cards, where these grungy hearts are going to go on. So as I said in my first video, I've got a xxAmira Thinlits die. It's kind of like an inset die. So what you end up doing is cutting some chipboard or cardstock, and it just cuts out the shape that you want. So in this die set, I've got 4 types of patterns. I've got a lattice, a diamond shape, a honeycomb die, and like a circular circles die. And you can see I'm just cutting them out here. So all you do is put in whatever size card you want to cut out. I put in, I think, a 4x6 cardstock, and then all I'm doing now is just cutting out the patterns into the size that I want to fit the ATC. Now the ATC here is usually a 2.5 by 3.5. Sometimes I cut them down to just a little bit under that because I want the whole ATC to be 2.5 by 3.5, and I usually have a thicker card underneath it to sturdy it up and make it look better, but I will talk about that later in the tutorial. But right now the base is almost 2.5 by 3.5, and here I am just cutting 4 different patterns using that xxAmira Thinlit die. And let's get started. So for the first one, I'm choosing this lattice design, and I'm going to start off using some dimensional texture paste, and I'm just going to use my spatula to put it through a stencil. This is a Kaiser Craft stencil, which I think is called Lace, but it also has this kind of crisscross. Really love this. This is one of my newest purchases. And I have learned to clean as I go. It makes things so much easier for when you use it next time. I dry off the texture paste with my heat gun, and then I'm now just going to be adding some spray inks. Now I'm using the same colors on the background that I did for the hearts, not necessarily using the same pattern that I used the bits that I put on the hearts, if you know what I mean, but definitely matching the colors on the hearts with the colors on the ATC background. So all I'm doing here is adding color and then drying and then adding more color and then drying, and I add color in different ways. Sometimes I spray, sometimes I pick it off the mat, sometimes I smush it with my finger, and this is just playing so much fun. So now you can see that my heart looks exactly like my background, and it's not really that good because it doesn't really stand out. So the first thing I do is ink the edges, and then I decide to add a little bit of the archival black to the lattice, but it doesn't really stand out. So I'm reaching out for this Inca Gold. This is the silver, and love this stuff. When you add it on, I do add it on with my fingers. A lot of people say don't put your finger in it because you contaminate it, but I haven't had that problem yet, so I'm doing that. I'm also adding a little bit of the silver around the heart, but what you do need to do is you need to buff this stuff off. It needs to come off. It can't just be a thick layer. It doesn't sit. It's greasy and it transfers. So once you add it, definitely buff it off. And I just love how the silver looks with the sepia and the crimson and the black. It just looks so contrasty. Really, really love this. So this goes on. It goes on flat, and then I'm thinking it needs a little bit something more. So I remember I bought this silver string walking down the streets of Hong Kong from my Hong Kong journey in 2018. I think I went. And I remember thinking, oh, I can use that string here. So I use it for the first time here, and I'm really happy. And I'm trying really hard to make like a funky bird's nest, but stuff's really weird. I don't know how people make it look so amazing. So I kind of make a little nest there, and I'm trying to group it together so it kind of looks organically cool, but it's kind of a little struggle. But I make it work in the end. I ended up putting 2 layers of foam tape on the back of the heart, and then kind of grouping the nesty string all to the back of it, and just made sure that nothing was poking outside the boundary of the ATC. And then I added just a little scrap of black cardstock, again with foam tape, just to lift it off the background, because the heart and the background are like the same color. But once you lift it off, it really makes a difference. So just adding a little bit of dimension and 2 elements underneath that heart made all the difference. And that's it for ATC number 1. So for ATC number 2, what I ended up doing, I'm showing you the die here. So I just cut out a little bit of a cereal box to make a stencil. And I said this originally, I bought these dies because I wanted to make stencils out of them. And so once I've dried that texture paste, I'm now adding some of the Glimmer mist. I'm adding the lighter color first, spraying it on, and the heart looks really good there. And I'm just adding a second layer just to make it look darker. And then I thought I would go back and just add a touch of the pink. And because it's dry, it's not really moving much here, as you can see. So I sprayed a little bit with the violet, and just like that, it runs really beautifully and very organically, and the 2 colors mix so nicely, and it just looks really, really lovely. I give it a little bit of a help with my finger. I dry it, and then I do the same thing again, and you just kind of keep going until you get the right color vibrancy that you're looking for. And I love how this background looks. So as you can see, once again, it looks the same as my heart. So I've brought in some of those circle heart cardboards that I cut out. I'm gonna go ahead and ink the edges with black, and then I decide to add the black to the elements here, the circle elements, and I think that looks really good. I brought in the silver string again, and I thought I'd add it to the back there. It's nice. It's very thin and very delicate. There's something there, but it's not taking away from the heart or taking away from any of the elements in the background. So I just add it on. It just sits nicely with some of that art glitter glue behind the heart. This time I decided not to add any foam tape, and I just stuck the heart right on to the background. Now I'm just showing you this first stage. The first stage is how I did the background and how I attached the hearts and some of the elements that I use. I will come back and show you a third stage of this ATC. So with this third ATC, I used the diamond inset, and I cut out a whole panel of 4x6 with this diamond pattern. Once again, adding texture paste. After that, I end up drying it, and then I'm using the 2 colors here. Now, if you can see, my paints are going straight in, and I realized that I didn't spray them onto the side that was covered in gesso. So really interesting here. See how it just soaks up all the ink straight away? So I did that on the wrong side of the card. But that's okay, it still looks good. It's just not as vibrant as if it had been done on the gessoed side. I decided that I wanted to do a little bit of a little extra white. I needed a little bit of white in the background. This part didn't really work so well. I left it in just to show you that sometimes not everything you do works. It kind of didn't make much of a difference here. I didn't think that it was that special. So it doesn't matter. I was just going to keep going anyway. This is Inca Gold in the blue. Gosh, this stuff is so dreamy. I love it. And I love the contrast of the dark background blue and the light Inca Gold blue. It's very cool. So now I'm inking up the edges, and I end up putting black all over the inside where the white was. I thought, well, if I can't make it white, let's make it dark, because the Inca Gold is just so bright blue. So then I thought that it was giving me this vibe of underwater sea. So I thought, well, I'll get some hessian and I'll make this sort of like a sea themed ATC. And the hessian looks really good there. It adds an amazing texture. I love how that turned out. So that's going to be my ATC. That's going to be my nautical ATC. And last of all is this heart, and I knew to find the gesso side this time from my mistake from the last one. I've got this really cool mosaic stencil that I really love. I go back to it over and over because it just creates such an amazing pattern, and you'll see in a minute when I spray just how strange a pattern it is. It's like really, It's like, reminds me of cobblestones in Italy. It's so cool. And it really holds the ink in there. So it allows the two colors to blend really nicely as you move the ink around. So I really love how this looks. So I'm just playing here, adding puddles of brown into the corners, letting it soak in and letting the red mix with the brown. Had a little bit of spillage there with the top, but quickly regained composure, cleaned it up, and kept on going. Inking the edges as usual. Some steps are steps that you do all the time, and some steps are just steps that are done for 1 or 2 ATCs. So coming back in here with the honeycomb element, I decided to trim it just a little bit. I trimmed it a little bit thick on the edges. So I just trim it a little bit here. And I love how it does a V into the middle. Reaching for my Inca gold in the color gold, and it just looks so good. I love that vintage brown look with the bright red look with the gold look, and the black around the edges is just such a great combination. I end up putting a little bit of gold on the heart as well, and buffed that off. And then I just scraped some of the gold on top of the cobblestone mosaic background. Just felt like the right thing to do at the time, and it just looks really, really good. And very different from the heart focal point, which doesn't have gold on it at all, other than what I put around the edges. So now I realize that once I put the honeycomb elements on top, that it's a little bit too much gold on gold. And what I'm doing here is adding a little bit of black paint to some diamond die cuts, and just trying to bring in a darker color to pull the focal point away from all that gold. I made a little nest of the gold thread, and once again I put a little bit underneath the heart, and then I had another little bit, and what I decided to do was wrap the gold thread around the heart itself. It wasn't something I was thinking of, it just kind of sort of came to me as I was holding it in my hand. I thought, well, why not wrap the gold thread around the heart so it looks like the heart is bundled up in the gold thread, and it actually turns out looking really good. So I really like how that turned out, and I'm just holding that together with clips until it holds together. So now we're at the stage where the ATCs are done, but they need a little bit of cherry on top, so to speak. So I went into my collection looking for some extra elements to add. And for this first one, I found like a wonky heart and a little charm, and they looked really good. I thought that the silver matched the silver thread and the silver lattice, so they go together perfectly. For the second one here, it kind of felt really whimsical, so I decided to make it like a spring themed grungy heart. So I pulled out some wood veneer elements and added 2 leaves, which I inked up with Distress Ink Cracked Pistachio. And for the butterfly, I grabbed 3 different Distress inks. I think one is Shaded Violet, one is Scattered Straw, and the third one is not actually Distress ink, it's a pink. It'll come up in a minute. So those 3 colors make up the color of the butterfly, and I ended up attaching the butterfly right on top of the heart, so that looks really cute. And then for my third one, which I deemed to be my nautical ATC, I found this anchor, which is really cool, goes down in the corner. Found this really brilliant blue flower charm, and although it's not nautical, it really goes well, so I added it anyway. I found a shell which I picked up on the beach earlier in the week, and there's this really cute seahorse that I put onto the hessian, and love this one. Okay, and for this last one, since I bundled up the heart, I thought, well, that heart is now locked up. We need to find some kind of a key. So I found a key in my jewelry stash, which looks good, and I found the word love in a wood veneer. So I thought, oh, love is the key, or perhaps the key is love. So you take that however you like it. and I ended up inking the word love, just inking the edges and give it a little bit of interest. And then that goes down just below the black lattice there. I was thinking of putting it on the heart, but then I didn't want to cover up the binding of the string around the heart. I wanted you to see it. So I just put it down at the bottom there. So that's that extra step of adding more elements to your ATC. The next step is adding a little bit of chipboard to go underneath your ATC. So I don't like it when people send ATCs just as they are, flimsy little cards. What I end up doing is always adding some, I always end up cutting some serial board and then attaching it underneath the ATC. And when you receive an ATC that is framed with a black cardboard, it is so much better than just receiving a flimsy ATC on just a flimsy card. So this is probably just a little bit of my taste and my experience from 5 years of swapping ATCs, swapping with just general people who don't really swap too much ATCs. That's what they do. But when you go into a serious dedicated ATC swap group, which is what I've been in, these are like, you have to do this or you're not in our group. So I really appreciate joining that group a while ago because they kind of lifted up my game in ATC, and I do that from ever since I've joined their group. I've been doing that with my swaps, and I just like the standard of work that it shows. So I am now just cutting so now the serial boxes are 2.5 by 3.5, and you just have to adjust your ATC card to match that. So now your next step is adding a sentiment, and I'm using the Tim Holtz tiny words, or I think they're called clippings, and I'm just matching sentiments to my ATCs. So the first one with the wonky arrow, I know this is going to sound really dark, but the first one says, to find she was so perfectly alone. So like you fall in love with someone and then you find that you're still alone. It's really sad. So that's my first one. The second one with the spring floral, with the butterfly and the leaves, I put he must have gone crazy because he's now buying her flowers and doing pretty things for her, and he used to be this manly man. So now he must have gone crazy to do girly things for girls. The third one, which is my nautical ATC, I chose The Stranger Within. So I felt I have this overwhelming feeling of being underwater and being in a strange environment and turning into someone you don't know who you are once you're in love. So you've unleashed the stranger within once you're in love. I know, this is how my strange mind works, and I don't mind sharing with you. And lastly, with the key and the love, I put when in a single knot you tie ... So like you fall in love, or you chain up your heart, or you take that however you want it, but that's the sentiment that leads into that thought process. So and so next is the last part. I looked at the ATCs and thought, oh, they're just so neat and clean, and even though they're inked around the edges, they're so neat and clean. Let's put some splatter on. That's what all the artsy people do. So I add a little bit of white paint with a little bit of water, and I grabbed my liner brush and I tap, and I got paint splatter everywhere, but it did land also on the cards, which is good. So the last step, I promise this is the last step, and I picked this up from my ATC group too. You need to always put your card on the back, and on the back all you need to do is just add a title, a name, a date, and the information like this is card 1 of 4, this is card 2 of 4, and made in Perth, Australia, like that. So just all your information and which swap group you're doing it for and all that stuff. So there you go, you guys. That is my 4 ATCs for February 2020. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Thank you for sticking with me, and I will see you in my next video.